What I enjoy most about teaching, I suppose, is the students. You invest a lot of time and energy and also a certain amount of emotional commitment into the students. When they do well, you get an enormous sense of achievement, not in and of yourself, but for them.
The atmosphere in the class really changes over the course of the year. At the beginning, I try to give students time to get to know each other and to get to know me. And at the end, it's more spontaneous and they talk more, they have developed more of a bond with each other and with me. I usually have a 20-minute lecture at the beginning of the class in every session, and then the rest of it, it's more free discussion. I often try to make the lecture frame the rest of the discussion so that they have some building blocks around which to coordinate. After that, I try and stand back as much as possible and they can talk freely.
The kind of classroom atmosphere I would like to create is one where everyone feels really unthreatened and unfrightened. So very, very comfortable, emotionally, socially, culturally. And this is not an easy thing to achieve in a place where you have people from very differential educational, social and cultural backgrounds. However, I also feel that a good classroom atmosphere is one where people feel uncomfortable intellectually, so that everyone, including students who've come from the highest and most elite institutions, are challenged in some very deep intellectual way, perhaps even challenged in terms of how they view themselves.
I particularly like the interaction with students in the classroom. One of the things I like most is when actually they start a discussion themselves. And in a way, as a teacher, your job is to step back from that moment and to allow them to become historians themselves, to ask questions of the material, to think their own questions and debate them and discuss them in a peer learning dynamic. That's very important to me.
My research and my teaching are closely connected to each other. I usually find that teaching is very good and useful for my research because I usually test research ideas on students. So if I've been thinking about a topic recently and I've just had some thoughts, then the students are usually the first audience with which I share the first thoughts and they know about this. Sometimes it can be tricky because obviously you have, as a researcher, you have firm views on the literature, or well, more or less firm views on the literature, and you know where you stand on a particular debate. And as a teacher, you want to present the debate in such a way that all sides have equal weight and they're all being presented as equally worth taking seriously. But of course, as a researcher, you know that your heart lies with one position in the literature rather than another position. So it can be tricky to integrate teaching and research because on the one hand, you want to preserve the impartiality of the teacher, but then on the other hand, you also, as a researcher, are passionate about what you're doing, and so you feel more strongly about certain issues and certain authors than about others.
In terms of technology, it can be quite difficult to get the balance right, and I do hope I've achieved that, a blend between using the internet and modern technologies, but also keeping some of those old traditional skills which are very important as well. I really want students to know how to take notes properly, to know how to listen, which is a skill that increasingly in the modern world is being lost, to listen to complex arguments being presented by their peers in discussion, and to really hear what's being said and think about it and critically analyse it. So listening is an important skill they have to learn. In terms of the technology, however, it's incredibly useful to have a Moodle site for your course where you can put up the primary source materials. So for example, when I'm teaching the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 13 and 1913, I use a Moodle site to present the Carnegie investigation into the atrocities committed during those conflicts. And that's very useful. They can access the primary source material, they can access the eyewitness material from the period immediately, and I don't have to really mediate them gaining access to those sources. What's also very useful is the access the internet provides us with to films from historical periods. So for example, in one class that was being taught, we were able to use an original film dating back to the First World War as part of the presentation. And that was extremely helpful for the students to gain a sense of what that period was like.
My one piece of advice for a new colleague or a younger colleague in the department would be take teaching seriously. All too often in our career, there's a lot of emphasis placed on your research excellence, the amount that you publish, the amount of conference papers that you give, your involvement in major international research projects. And while that's undoubtedly true, I think sometimes it can come at the expense of time devoted to the actual teaching that's involved in our job. Students do notice that people don't take the time to either properly structure a class, to update their reading list regularly, to respond to emails, and it has a knock-on effect on their approach to study.
Don't try to control everything in your seminars and your lectures. Leave enough space to allow the students to breathe, to think about the ideas, to come up with even humorous commentaries on what you've said. Because you can pack any amount of knowledge into a 45-minute lecture, but if there isn't that space for it to breathe, it's almost as if it's wasted.
When you enjoy teaching and when you enjoy the class atmosphere, when you enjoy getting to know the students, everything becomes easier. I just love teaching. I like the students very much. I like getting to know them. At the end of the year, you have known a whole new generation of people, and I find that teaching is where our research actually has the most impact, in the sense that if you're thinking about research and publication and you think an article you've published, there may be 20, 30 people out there who will read it if you're lucky. But every year we have a chance to actually speak to 30 young people who will become successful and will take something from what you're teaching them. And I think if you approach it in the right spirit, then it can become really great experience.